I wrote a song called Ride That Train to Glory. We're going to start with that. This gives you more of the feel of sometimes the energy that might have been popping up when I was growing up in church. So, that TV preacher on my television said for $10 he would send me a cassette. Now this could be my ticket to ride, and I'll ride that train to glory when I die. Well, ride that train to glory, ride it bye-bye. Ride that train to glory when I die, oh Lord. Ride that train to glory, ride it bye-bye. Ride that train to glory when I die. I got that old-time religion way down in my bones. I got Jesus on the main line, he's calling me home. The devil, he's a hellhound, he's on my trail. Well, I got myself a ticket, he can go straight to hell. Well, ride that train to glory, ride it bye-bye. Ride that train to glory when I die, oh Lord. Ride that train to glory, ride it bye-bye. Ride that train to glory when I die. Well, this whole world is crazy, it's out of control. Life ain't as simple as we used to know, but my little light is shining in spite of it all, and I'll ride that train to glory when I hear all aboard. Well, ride that train to glory, ride it bye-bye. Ride that train to glory when I die, oh Lord. Ride that train to glory, ride it bye-bye. Ride that train to glory when I die. Sing this. Well, I'll fly away, oh, free I'll fly away. If you know it, sing it. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. One more time. Well, I'll fly away, oh, free I'll fly away. Well, when I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. I've always felt good here. Everybody's so kind. And I was looking at the description for the congregational covenant, and I always really felt like that was a good thing, but it was adopted in 1898, which is about the same time the church that I grew up in was being formed in the hills of North Carolina. And when I looked up the name of the person that started that church on the internet, it started off by saying a sectarian Christian leader. And I was thinking about the same exact time there's one group of people writing this sort of covenant of inclusion, while there were others trying to figure out ways to separate us and to keep people out and to keep things their version of holy or pure. And it made me thankful that there was two thoughts at that time. And it makes me thankful that this place is here. Let me get this back up here. First thing this morning, I realized something. I realized don't watch Dateline on a Sunday morning. And I also put on a jacket, and I reached in the pocket and found two pairs of reading glasses. So I think I'm getting older. Two pairs in one pocket, it was a weird thing. But anyway, the song Precious Memories, I think I'm just one person that has these precious memories, but I know there's a lot of people here that have precious memories about their past and the things they grew up in, the traditions they grew up in, and their parents and grandparents. And I'm here to talk about how I grew up. Early on, one of the first things I remember is the title of brother and sister in church. It wasn't mandatory, but it was used all of the time, where it was brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. Even as you got to be a teen, it would be brother Matt or, brother Matt. Or if an elder in the church would be sister Parker, either by last name, or sister Genevieve by her first name. And brother so-and-so, even my dad being the preacher, never went by reverend. It was either Pastor Texter Pastor John, preacher, even, hey preacher, they would say that. So that's the first thing I remember is sort of this idea of family and community. And another thing I remember quite vividly is we didn't just have church Sunday morning. We had church Sunday night and Wednesday night, midweek service. And being the preacher's kid, I never got out of it, ever. Almost my whole life, every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, I went to church. From 7 till 9 on Wednesday nights, from 7 to 9 on Sunday nights, and every Sunday morning from Sunday school, and then church ending around noon. And along with that, though, I also remember the week-long revivals where traveling preachers would come in, from another state. And that would start at 7, but it might end at 11 every night of the week. So I remember as a kid laying under the church pew, because I'm a little boy and I could do that. And I'd be, sounds gross, but you'd be looking at the gum underneath the seats. And I would remember looking down, when you're under, there's a very unique view when you're under the pews of a church, all the feet. So as a kid, you're laying there just looking at all the legs. But what you're hearing, though, is these very fiery sermons. Brother so-and-so, evangelist so-and-so would be preaching, trying to get people to respond to the sermon. In the church that I grew up in, there was three main things you were trying to do. You were trying to save souls or be saved. There was a second work they called sanctification, which is the removal of that root to want to sin, they would claim. I think that came out of the Methodist tradition. And then baptism of the Holy Ghost, which is when you speak in tongues. That was the only way you knew you had it, is if you spoke in tongues. So these preachers would get fired up, and then by the end, everybody's singing, shouting, and then by the end, he really pulls at your heartstrings, and you have to go up to the altar and be saved. And that's something I remember, laying under those pews, hearing the preaching going. And as I got older, I would respond to those words. But that fiery music, those rhythms, like that song I just wrote, that's the kind of rhythms you would hear in the church I grew up in. And it's harder and harder to find these kinds of churches anymore, honestly, with the advent of the internet and newer songs and stuff being brought into churches. So I really appreciate it from a historical standpoint of how I grew up. Traveling preachers, a lot of times they would have a music ministry, they'd call it, where the husband and wife would sing together. One preacher came in and even had, I don't know if anybody knows what this is, but he had one of these weird electronic harpsichord looking things called an omnichord. And he would sing with that. I just remember that being something kind of weird when I was a kid. But anyway, that's where I learned how to play guitar and sing was in church. I got my first guitar from a pawn shop in Chattanooga, Tennessee, because we were down there for a church gathering. And my buddy and I took a break from church. Didn't really tell my dad. But we went down to this pawn shop, and there was a guitar hanging there. And I asked my dad if I could get it for $40, and that was the first guitar I had. And then we didn't have much money growing up. The church my dad belonged to would, the first church my dad was sent to was, we went from Newcastle area all the way out to Snyder County to Beaver Springs, Pennsylvania, in the Appalachians of Pennsylvania. And we drove there. It felt like, one of the things I was thinking about is moving when I was a little boy felt like it was it felt like we were 1,000 miles away. You know what I mean? You get in the car and you move somewhere. And I drove out there, it was 4.5 hours from Erie, this a couple weekends ago, and I found the church where my dad pastored. And we get there, and it's a small little church. Most of the churches my dad was in never had more than 35 people. So a preacher rolls in with a family. It's kind of hard for a small church to support a family. So one of the things my dad did before he got into the ministry, he was an auto body, worked on cars. So we would roll into a church, and since they couldn't support us, he would not only be a full-time minister every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, he also worked all day as an auto body tech. So that was a good example for me to see hard work. And he never wanted to put that burden on the people of the church, to take care of them. And I can appreciate that. And it was the kind of church in the mountains where we moved far away from my grandma. So there was a little old lady there but Sister Richards, but I called her Grandma Richards. And every day, every church day after, we would go up to her and she'd give all the little kids caramel candies before she left. And that was a fun treat for us. And we all called her Grandma Richards. And I would go to her house and she would give us milk to drink in an old tin cup, the old ones with the handle. She heated her house by wood. This is in the 80s, but she heated her house by wood. Single older woman taking care of herself. It's the kind of place where they say, do you want some sweet corn? And we say, yeah. And they would say, let's go pick it. Or, would you like some chicken? Yeah. Well, they would bring you a whole chicken that you had to figure out what to do with. So, but it was a good time, and I remember how close-knit everybody was. And there were times when we were struggling, and people would give what they would call I don't know why they called it a pounding, but they'd call it a pounding. They would bring bags of groceries sometimes to the pastor and his family. And I remember one time, we were having a hard time, and it must have been a church where my dad didn't know where he was going to find a job. And my sister and I have a younger sister. I had a younger sister. She passed away a few years ago. But we wanted cookies. We wanted Oreos, but we couldn't afford that. And one time we expressed we wanted cookies, and my mom made some kind of, I don't want to say excuse, but, passed us along, and we got 2 bags of groceries that day, and right on top was a bag of Oreo cookies. And just saying that when somebody's hurting, sometimes you want to give them the essentials, but those little extras sometimes can mean a lot. So that was always something that made me think about caring for each other, One of the traditions that's a little unusual, we all heard of communion, but my church took it very seriously. During the communion service, Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. So we did feet washing. We would all do the communion together, and then the men would stay upstairs, and usually the women would go to one of the Sunday school rooms or the basement or the fellowship hall, and we would have a basin of water set up and a couple towels, and we would start on one end, and usually the pastor would start by washing the feet of one of the men, or the vice, and the women would do the same, and all the way down in a prayerful servant attitude, we would wash each other's feet the whole way down the aisle. And I remember distinctly one time I was in a service with my grandfather and he washed my feet. And that was something that stuck with me. And again, this idea of that I carry on with me is this idea of servanthood, this idea of helping each other, meeting each other's needs. A lot of times we can see these sort of news stories and these rallies, and we see there's such division, and appears to be hate, and sometimes is. But when we respond with giving and respond with hearing and seeing and listening and drawing on these examples of where we can find commonality, I think we can hold on to the memories, but we can move forward. It's a way to move forward, is to remember these kinds of lessons that we learn throughout our lives, even when there's these challenging circumstances. The church I grew up in, like I said, it was considered a sectarian leader. The way that we were separate and the way that we created holiness or appeared to be holy would be we didn't do a lot of things. Women might not cut their hair and if they're stricter. They might not cut their hair. They wouldn't wear dresses. They wouldn't wear pants. They would wear dresses down to their ankles. Men, a lot of times, especially in church, I never saw a lot of older men that grew up real traditional wearing anything but like a button-up work shirt or a white shirt, slacks. They would go even a little bit further. We didn't wear jewelry at all, not even a wedding ring. The idea was that it would show a prideful heart if you wore some kind of jewelry. So you didn't want to do that. You wanted to give all glory to your version of God. And it would go even further. Some older people wouldn't even want you to drink out of a can of pop because it looked like you might be drinking a can of beer. My grandmother didn't like us having playing cards because of gambling. Definitely didn't go play bingo. I didn't go to an actual movie theater, partly because we moved a lot and we're in smaller towns that didn't have them or didn't have money. But I didn't go to a movie theater until probably I was almost a teenager. They didn't want you to go to movies. Didn't want you to go to baseball games because people drank there and all these things. No dances. All of those things. So it was a very old-fashioned sort of turn-of-the-century holiness movement that we followed. And but we did have great food. We had great songs. We had gatherings. When if somebody was hurting, we would definitely pull together. And I grew up in these little rural churches with a lot of people that didn't have the means to get the medical help they needed. So you had to depend on the Lord. That's what they would call it. Which is something that I've recognized now, and I'm getting to a place here, but a lot of the people that were in leadership are very hard workers. I'm talking men, by the time they were older, crippled hands with arthritis, and very little to live off of, very little means, but they always worked hard. So you got to understand sometimes when we look at people that wonder how they have such a seemingly simple faith, it's because they don't have a whole lot more than that. That's why when we sing songs about heaven being a place of joy and rest, we need it. That's the hope. That's why we live the way we live, that someday we'll be able to have that rest. Growing up, that's what I believed. And honestly, you had very little options in these rural areas to really make a change. You were so far from D.C., you were so far from really the political machines that affected us, but we had there's no connection. There's no connection to that. So we had to trust in the Lord, and we had to trust each other, that we would help each other, and we had to pay attention to each other. And so I went through all that. As I got older, and I moved to Erie, honestly, I moved from Grove City to Erie. That's when I moved out of my family's house. And I started thinking differently. Even in Erie, Pennsylvania, I was able to meet people with different ideas and different approaches to life, and people that love people that I never thought about loving. And I started I call it deconstructing slowly, because you meet people that are open and caring, or that are suffering and need help more than just praying. When you meet people that need more than just the hope of heaven, I started seeing the possibility that we can make changes right here. And so one of the first things to go for me, and was a strong belief in my youth, was the belief that hell was a real place of punishment. And in my particular church, it was, you had to maintain these certain beliefs and traditions, or you were going to go to hell forever. Well, as I got older and I started looking at all the differences amongst the faiths and amongst people, I started thinking, well, that doesn't make much sense. What would that purpose be? Would God just be like, I told you so? Forever? That seems a little extreme. You're messed up, you're stuck, but you're just stuck, and that's forever. So what does that, you just resign yourself to this or whatever? And I was like, so I really just gave up the idea that there needs to be a hell, or there needs to be eternal punishment or something. So then that starts picking away at a lot of the other beliefs. You have to believe this so you don't go to hell. Well, why do I need to believe that now? So I picked away at all of these things, and the thing is, I lost a lot of family connections, community, history, like this cutoff. Because what they would say backslide, that's why I mentioned backsliding. When you backslide and you turn your back on these beliefs, you lose these connections. They think you're gone, that you're on your way to hell. And it's hard to come back from that. It's hard to meet in the middle when you feel like everybody's so far gone, And I also lost simple answers to big questions. It's easy to just be black and white and kind of you have all these solutions. I do this, and then it's better, I go to heaven. Well, then you lose that kind of certainty. And all of a sudden you're wading in the gray. And you're kind of well, what am I supposed to do with this? So I started, I didn't wallow too long in that. Because what I did was I recognized that I realize that I'm hopeful, and I trust people. I trust that we figure out a way to overcome these adversities and we move forward. And I decided that instead of being part of a sectarian group, that I wanted to be part of a group of people that went together, that marched together to make it better for everybody. You know, that heaven isn't for one specific person or one specific group. That I don't even know if heaven's for anybody. But I do know that where we are right now, where we are is it's better when we work together. It's better when everybody has the same kind of equity. I find beauty in diversity now. I find one of the things that really hit me over recent years is the first thing that happened after I really stopped believing was my dad at the beginning of COVID had a heart attack. And they're all the way down in Grove City, which doesn't seem far, but when you have family and work, you got to figure that stuff out. And he was going to have to be in the hospital all by himself because they wouldn't let anybody in during COVID. And I'm an only child now. Like I said, my sister passed away, and that weighed on me very heavily. And I broke down. It was the first time in my life where I broke down and I didn't know, I didn't pray. Who would I pray to? I don't believe in that anymore. What do I pray? Who do I pray to? You know? And I just cried. And what came over me was this idea of shared suffering. I started thinking about the people that I know that have had people in their lives have heart attacks. I started thinking about how some of them didn't make it, and about how some of them did. And that gave me hope. It gave me comfort that even if it went bad, that I was amongst a group of people, I was part of a community where they would pull together and help me. Or my dad would make it through. And I found comfort in the idea of shared suffering and shared victory, shared overcoming of obstacles. And that's what we need to do, you know, is to stay focused and to push forward. So of all the things I gave up, what I found health. I found the idea that there needs to be living wages, that we could work towards that these small communities that I moved throughout my life, where they could have the wages they need to support their families and not suffer. They could have health care so they don't have to suffer. I lived in beautiful places. One of the places I lived was Cordova, Alaska. And what I realized that if we focus on this life and working together, that we can protect the environment. These beautiful spaces, the water and the air. I realized that if we work together, instead of pulling everybody apart based on these perceptions of what's right and wrong, that we can have safety and security, that we can have equitability, that we can have opportunity for everybody, that we can have food security, so nobody has to be hungry. And one of the things that I kept are the songs. And what I find is that the songs connect us to our past, whether it's a Beach Boys song, or a Creedence Clearwater Revival song, or a Joan Baez song, or a Pete Seeger song. They bring us to a memory, a good memory usually. Some of us might have bad memories associated to a song, but I don't have too many of those. And so what I do is I do like to think back fondly of those communal times, those times of celebration that I experienced. A lot of gospel songs were adapted for the civil rights movement, something I connect to. So I like to say the gospel is a recognition of what is. When you look at these, it's so hard, but what is, but also it shares a hope of what will be. And I think that's important. I think we need to have more songs that kind of push us forward to what can be right here and right now. And it is something that when I have family reunions, I still bring my guitar to, and we open up the old hymnals and we all sing together. So even though we don't talk about the state of my salvation or how my relationship with the Lord is, that isn't always brought up anymore. But we do sing I'll Fly Away, and we do sing all the old songs that we sang together. And I find a lot of comfort in that when I think about gospel music. I think about my dad's voice. My dad's a very loud singer, and he's a good singer. In these little churches, when there's like 15 people there on a Sunday sometimes, when my dad stops singing to take a breath or something, it feels like everybody stopped. And we all look around, and he just starts singing again. Or when I think about songs, particularly in that family, I think about Sister Donna Rish. One of the songs she liked to sing was, you will notice we say brother and sister round here. It's because we're a family and our hearts are so near. When one has a heartache, we all shed a tear and rejoice in each victory, 'cause we're a family so dear. So there's a lot of things in these songs that can feel like they separate us, but if we pull those out and we really take them to heart, we can make a big change. You gotta move, you got to move, you got to move, child, you gotta move. Now when the Lord gets ready, you got to move. You may be high, you may be low, you may be rich, child, you may be poor.